I'm here this afternoon with Guy Skinner from Citygate Financial Planning, which he started about 11 years ago, I think. Guy's been a financial planner for, about 20 years or so, starting out in the scary bad old days of cold calling, but by the sounds of it, that taught him a huge amount he's built his career on. Guy is in the enviable position, I think, of having established a really thriving business supported by a fabulous team. I speak for experience there, I've met them all, many of whom are homegrown, and Guy continues to receive a great flow of new client inquiries, largely based on referrals, I believe. When it comes to financial planning, Guy, I think, is one of the most passionate people I've met. And this year he's brought that passion to various stages, from Advisor 3.0 to PFS roadshows and the Purely Paraplanning Future Advisor Conference just the other week. I've got to know Guy through work that we're both doing with Brett Davidson at FP Advance, and he's worked with me a bit this year as well. And I'm delighted that he's agreed to have a chat with me this afternoon about all things financial planning and more. So welcome, Guy. Thank you very much for taking the time for a chat.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a welcome thing to speak about yourself, so it's not a problem.
Fabulous. So, well, I think that would be a great place to start, actually. So one of the things that I've seen you speak a few times now and talk about your why a lot, and that really feels like it's your motivation. You've got so clear on why you're a financial planner and why you think it's so important and such a valuable profession. Everything else sort of seems to flow from that for you. And I wondered if we could just start by you saying a little bit more about that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, when I was 10 years old, my dad died of cancer, and he was 44. I do have this written down as a really well rehearsed story that I would deliver on stage, but I'll be a bit less formal right now, and not try and make people cry quite as much. But the reality was that life was difficult, and it's difficult when a parent dies and you're young, no matter what happens. But the aftermath of my dad's death was very much a good experience from a financial perspective, and finances lead into what your home life is like. So the fact that my dad had taken financial advice a couple of years before he died, and that was by virtue of the fact he was the managing director of the company he worked at, that he had that privilege of having the experience. He had the right level of life insurance because somebody had really forced him to think about what happens if you die. There was no reason to think he'd have a shortened life expectancy at all. He didn't know what was around the corner. He didn't have any ill health at the time. But he did think about, well, what would happen if he was earning a good amount of money as the MD of a company. My mum was a stay-at-home mum, and he just appreciated the fact that she hadn't been in the workplace for 15 years. She had 3 children, and what would life look like? So he insured himself for the right level of capital payout, and he also changed the benefits on his pension scheme to maximise the death benefit for the benefit of my mum, because I think he appreciated that the trajectory of his career meant that they'd always be fine so long as he was alive. But if he wasn't, then there would be a financial issue. And sadly, 2 years after that point in time, he did die. But the consequences of what he'd done meant that, we didn't move house, we had no mortgage, mum didn't have to go and find a job. She didn't have to rush into a relationship, which is something I can see fairly commonly. I work in a bereavement charity, I volunteer in a bereavement charity for children in the town that I live in, which covers North Herts and Stevenage. And I see so many examples of surviving parents that have to work double shifts. They can't then support their children in the way that they would like to. They can't give them that continuity of picking them up after school each day, giving them that sounding board of how's your day, darling, and let's talk about what's happening in your life. And that is vitally important when you're dealing with the aftermath of a person's death. So as horrific as it was, and it's a really unpleasant thing, and I didn't have actually, I could talk for hours about this, but I didn't, mum was there, but we didn't speak about it so much because we didn't want to upset one another. So I didn't really have that outlet of what to do, which is why I do the volunteer work. But financially, it gave some level of stability that at least I didn't feel a physical detachment from my mum as well after my dad had died. And you just don't know what's around the corner. So not only had my dad died, I then subsequently have a sister that's diagnosed as schizophrenic, and another sister that's got multiple sclerosis. So they've had their own challenges, which meant my mum had to, support them more than you would ordinarily support your children. And the foundations that were there because of what my dad had done meant that my mum could support them more than would have been the case as well. So it was after about a week of being in that Wolf of Wall Street type environment of office where I was cold calling, that I connected the dots. And it sounds daft that I'd never really thought about it before, but it was after a week where I realised, hang on a second, I'm trying to get in touch with people because I want to speak to them about a financial plan and having life insurance and other insurances. And it was very much an insurance-driven um, sort of pitch, if you like. And I realised, well, my life would have been completely different. And that was when I was 27. And that then became my superpower because I knew every time I picked up the phone and I called a stranger, I could have a positive impact on their life. And so that was then what just gave me the fuel to just, I beat all the records in that company. I was like Teflon. And no never stuck with me. I just carried on going. Um, so yeah, that's what sits behind my motivation.
Mm. Yeah, it's powerful stuff, isn't it? When you've got something that is such a strong driver for you. And I've heard you say that before, like just feeling like you could help anybody, you could absolutely add value to anybody. It's a big motivator, isn't it? So, I mean, not everyone's going to have such a powerful story or a powerful experience. But I know you're a big proponent of encouraging people to identify their why as their, whatever their why might be, as their motivating factor. What you work with your team on that as well, don't you? I wonder how you draw that out of people, or how you might suggest that people draw that out for themselves if there isn't something quite so obvious in their life. Where do you think is a good place to start?
Um, well, obvious is kind of a subjective word because it may seem obvious to you or I after many years of working in financial planning. Um, and it became apparent to me after that 1 week of cold calling. But I can tell you, there's many people I meet where what you think might be obvious just isn't at all.
Mm.
And it might be the fact that, I've met people who've had a parent die similarly to me. In fact, one person I'm thinking of, it was their mum and they were 7, and yet they hadn't connected the dots. But I think that's in part the fact that when we become a financial planner, or financial advisor, whatever we're going to term the role as, um, people think more about the products, perhaps. They don't necessarily think about the lifestyle consequences and what could happen. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in people's lives. And I tend to draw towards pain as a point of motivation because, you only have to see the BBC News of a morning and you might see somebody on there that's fundraising or they've started a charity. It's normally in the name of somebody that's died, where something went wrong. They might have had something missed out in an operation that should have been routine and somebody's died, or somebody was abused, or whatever it might be. But we're always trying to rectify that wrong so that nobody else has the same experience that we had or that the person we cared about had. And that could be a painful divorce. It could be that things weren't as amicable as they could have been because there was fighting about the finances. And actually, what could a financial planner have added to that situation to kept it more amicable? And then the childhood looks completely different, where the parents get on with one another, where compared to where they don't. That's one example. And divorce is a huge thing, isn't it? I mean, I think we're close to 50% of relationships end in divorce, and something like 7 years is the average duration of a marriage. So that must be quite a common thread. And I joke about it, but I've definitely kept married couples together and on the same page because when you put together a financial plan and you show them that they can spend guilt-free, and they then stop arguing about the little things that one might indulge in and the other chooses not to. Actually, it's all going to work out fine. You don't have to worry about it. You can stop arguing about it. Again, that could be your motivation. Um, there's people hate what they do for a living. There's people that have high expectations from their parents to go and be a lawyer, be a doctor, be an accountant, whatever the profession may be, that's earning great money, comes with some sort of aspirational tag to it. But actually, if they're miserable, that's not much good. It's not a very good lived experience. And it might just be the case that you can show them that they could still live well and have enough and do all the things they want to do, working part-time or moving in-house if they're a lawyer, or just having a more sustainable lifestyle when it actually matters. So if we think back to our pain points, what were the things that happened in your parents' journey? Where were you unhappy as a child? Where were you unhappy in your early career? Imogen within our team, she's left corporate law as a litigator for 10 years to come and work as a financial planner because she knew that wasn't working for her. It wasn't fulfilling her. And I can tell you there's a great many solicitors that have that experience, but they might become addicted to the lifestyle that goes with the trappings of what they earn. And it's just a case of, well, showing them how they can change their lifestyle. So that can become a great motivator if your experience was being stuck in something that was somebody else's expectations for your life, not your own. and where you want to get to. So there's a ton of things, but generally I think comes from a pain point. So what makes you unhappy or made somebody else that you care about unhappy? And then how can you go and alleviate that pain in the rest of the world for people that you could care about? But remember the fact we only need to find about 200 households per advisor for that to be the
Okay.
case. So it could be something really super specific. You know,
Mm.
it could be that you're trying to help parents of children with autism or ADHD, or it could be single fathers, it could be single mothers, it could be recently bereaved people, it could be all sorts of people that you want to help. There's no end of options.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think so. As you're talking there, my mind has just flipped to, so what is it that motivates me, and what's my why? And I think there is, it's either something that you have experienced, or something that you wish you'd experienced. I think is a really useful way of thinking about it. So I think that's it for me. There have been periods in my life, and at work particularly, where I had wished that I'd experienced a different perhaps relationship with a leader or a different culture, and that's kind of my motivator now. So I think that's great advice, like a really great place to start. Perhaps what's made a difference in your life, or what you wish you'd experienced that was different. Yeah, pain points they're powerful, aren't they, to pull all of that sort of thing together, like I guess to focus the mind. So you're obviously quite committed then to the profession more broadly as well. You're doing a lot to support the kind of next generation of financial planners, and getting out there and telling your story. Brett, I think very courageously telling your story, actually. I mean, perhaps I can guess the answer to this, but why does that matter to you? Like bringing on the next generation within Citygate and more broadly in the profession, why does it matter to you?
First, there's a few reasons and a few answers to that. One, why specifically within Citygate? Well, I'd like people to do it the way that I think is good to do it, which may sound slightly arrogant, but you know, I did have a history pre being directly authorized of being members of a network, and I didn't like the way that products were pushed. I didn't like the way that funds specifically were pushed.
Mm.
You know, I had a part-time job at Tesco when I was 18, and the mantra was, if you wouldn't put it on the shelf to buy yourself, well, if you wouldn't take it off the shelf to buy yourself, then don't put it on the shelf in the first place. And that's how I still view financial planning through the lens of, I would not give to a client something that I wouldn't take myself, be that
Mm.
insurance, be that an investment, be it the underlying funds, whatever it would be. Um, so I'm trying to indoctrinate people to the way that I view the world, because I'm not saying all networks are bad, because that's not the case at all.
Mm.
I do think they've got to accommodate the lowest common denominator, though, which means that it's not necessarily exactly what you might want to do. That's certainly the case for me. For example, I couldn't abide to what some of the networks would have wanted me to do. So that's why I'm trying to grow them within our own team. They also don't come with necessarily a baggage of, well, we always did it that way where I used to be, so I've got to retrain and teach people new things. But then the wider picture as to why I'm bothered about the next generation, it is probably the obvious thing that you were thinking. You know, it's the fact that if somebody hadn't taken the time to do that for my dad, then I wouldn't have had the life experience I've had. And if we're not careful, there's only something like $28,000, a great
Mm.
many at the older age of the spectrum, and towards the end of their career will die out. And it's not even the fact that we could die out. We serve about 8 to 9% of the population, whichever article you're reading at the time, or to give you a slightly different answer. But you know, it's a very elitist thing that we actually do, and it should be something that we share with the greater community, because there's a lot of good in the work that we do. So if there's more of us and we're a bit more innovative, we can find better price points, we can find different levels of service, and we can actually enlighten quite a few more people about the good that financial planning can do. And I, where I take issue with some other advisors, they solely focus around retirement. And don't get me wrong, the point at which you start drawing the income from your investments and stop adding to them, psychologically, it's a difficult point in time. Getting the investments correctly structured is also a difficult thing to do, and it's, you know, volatility in the marketplace, sequencing risk, and all that sort of stuff. It's a difficult challenge. But we shouldn't ignore the 20, 30 years prior to retirement that people live, because not everybody's going to get to 60 and retire. And too many people will live that unfulfilled life of just 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And that's if they're lucky, because it's more than 9 to 5 in a lot of the professions that we deal with people. But they don't do the stuff that they could have done. You know, so I had a call with business owners this morning, and they're in their late 30s. And what prompted them to come to me was that their parents didn't have any sort of plan for their retirement, and they're just not doing anything now, and they've not saved enough.
Mm.
And so actually we talk about the wider financial planning aspects, and they've got their own design agency. Well, do you take the summers off? You've got three children. You could have 6 weeks off every single year while your kids are at school, and you could go in your camper van and explore Europe. Because we already had a camper van pre-COVID and actually virtually sold it in COVID for a bump of profit. But that's the sort of stuff that people don't think is financial planning. They think financial planning is, well, I just need to put more into a pension because I don't want to look at my parents. But actually, maybe we could restructure life, that we can have half a day a week off so we can go and volunteer for a cause that was close to our heart. The stuff that would fill your own cup and make you fulfilled so that you have the energy and passion to work the other 4.5 days with vigor. But a lot of people have drained out of them because they just feel like, well,
Mm.
what is the point? I'm just a slave to money and nothing else. Or it could be that you get, the 6, 7 week period of time off where you're fortunate enough that you've taken the risk, you've started a business. Yes, there's going to be a dip in income while you're away, but what does that give you in terms of return on life with the family? As much as I kind of hate that phrase, but also I'd be willing to suggest they'll probably earn more money in the rest of the year while they are working because they're hugely energized. So these are the things that a financial planner can give. So we just need to have more financial planners. We need to have more financial planners that view it, without this sounding arrogant, in the way that I view it, rather than it being a product solution based thing. It's actually, let's look at the entirety of your situation. Let's think holistically. Let's probe and ask difficult questions and get your level of thinking to where it needs to be, where it's not just about be tax efficient, here's a pension, but it's actually what can money do for you and how can it change your life, both now and in the longer term and in the medium term, and just open up to possibilities rather than feel restricted. And that's what we do. So we should have probably 5 to 10 times the number of us that we do. And
Mm.
I think society at large would be so much happier if everyone knew what their money was trying to do for them, and they walked around with intention. They'd probably have far more of a smile on their face as you walk the streets. People would be kinder to one another, and that's all sort of the intangible output of people just knowing what their purpose is and
Mm.
living a satisfied life, not part of the rat race.
Mm. Yeah, fascinating. So what do you think? So you've obviously got quite clear views on how you believe financial planning should be done, and I well, I was about to say I think I share most of them. I think I share all of them actually. But what do you see as missing? Because I think what I'm observing, and maybe this is a post RDR thing, I don't know, with the kind of the minimum level of qualifications going up from that point, but there seems to be such a focus on technical knowledge and exams. But I don't know, I mean, everything that you've just described as great financial planning there is about much more than technical knowledge. Where do you see kind of skills gaps, or what's missing in the people that are coming through the profession? What do you see that people need to learn to do better, I guess?
But it's kind of related to the why aspect of it as well, because if you care enough, you'll be curious enough, you'll show up enough, you'll listen, you'll give people the time and space that they need. You're not just hurrying to get to the point of, let's just get a financial product in place. And that sounds like a huge accusational thing to say, and I don't think that is the steer of the many advisors, far from. And as much as I don't like to say this, I do think life experience is something that hugely tips the balance to when we become a far better planner. And I'm not saying that a young planner can't be a good planner, because they absolutely can. But once you've been through the trials and tribulations of starting your own family, once you've bought a house once or twice and the stress that that comes with, once you've handed in a resignation and you know that butterflies that you get in your stomach when you're like, I'm about to do something that's really quite scary, it's all helping you with future conversations. It's all helping you with experiences and empathy to understand the situation that somebody else that you might be speaking to is about to go through. And sadly, you can only get that from just experience. So I've not quite 20 years that you said at the top. It's 18 years now that I've been planning, but I'm not the planner I was 18 years ago. I'd still say, even though it was like I said, a Wolf of Wall Street kind of culture, and it was about sales, and it was pre-RDR, so it was very transactional. And most advisors were, not all were transactional pre-RDR. We still did have a holistic mindset towards it. We did still think about the bigger picture and what people actually wanted, but it wasn't cash flow modeling. It wasn't the way that a lot of us that would say we're financial planners now would deliver it. And so those skills have built over time. But I come back to the whole why aspect, because if you do tap into what your pain point is and what your motivation is, I think you'll shortcut that learning curve and expedite it far more quickly because you really care. And really caring is the key to a lot of things in life, because you'll just always show up and you'll be the best version of yourself, I think, when you're bothered about the person that you're speaking to.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I suppose if we're going to encourage more younger planners into the profession, especially with the demographic of the typical financial planner, depending what you read, is maybe late 50s still, although it's been there for like about the last 5 or 6 years, I think. So anyway, but if that is the case and we need more younger people coming into the profession, I guess they don't have 18 years probably to build up those skills. So obviously, as you came on the day course that I ran earlier this year, I wonder what you see. Well, I guess I'd love to hear what you took from that as an experienced planner as well, sort of on what you took from it that might support younger planners, but also, I guess, have you seen any other ways in which we can teach some of those skills and sort of bring them about a little bit more quickly?
Yeah, so with a young planner, I suppose it's removing themselves from the old adage that you must just go and find a 50-plus-year-old with £1 million,
Mm.
unless that is the experience that your parents had. I mean, I'm not saying it precludes you from working with those people, but if you're in your early 20s, you probably have parents in their 50s, and you can actually live vicariously through their experiences to think about the
Mm.
clients you're trying to help. So maybe have more conversations with them if they're willing to speak to you about what their particular pain points are with the part of the life they're in at the moment. And you might be surprised to find they'll tell you about their lack of identity when they've stopped working or in preparation for retirement. They might be thinking about, well, how am I going to fill my time? They might even, depends how open they are to sharing, they might say how nervous they are about having to spend 7 days a week with their partner. And and then these become real things because your parents have said it to you, and that's going to have an emotional impact on you, and that's going to make you feel something that then actually you can take into a conversation with a prospective client to go, actually, I can get a little bit more inside their head because this is what my parents have said. You've got to have an element of bravery to ask the questions in the first instance, anyway, from of a total stranger or who was a total stranger before you met them. Um, and there's no harm in that. Again, it comes from that curiosity piece. But I think there's a lot of things that we can do as people, that it doesn't just have to be that you've had, a parent die when you were young. There's a lot of things in my life that actually meant I was far more mature than my years by the time I was 27. I'd bought
Yeah.
properties, I'd had buy-to-lets, I'd inherited some money, I'd lost nearly all of it. Grandparents had died. Um, Dad had died, obviously, and then looking after my sisters and their health. So there's a lot, and I appreciate not everybody has that, and that's a good thing. Not, I wouldn't wish a lot of those things on other people, but there's still going to be some pain point.
Mm.
And again, I know I'm laboring it now, I'm going back to it, but if you can tap into what that pain point is, then there's experience of it. You've got an inside knowledge of what the difficulties are that somebody else has, how they think, what they might feel, what their experience was, which means you're then in a better position to help other people. But we could do other things outside of our own families. So we could go and do some volunteer work. You could man the phones at Samaritans and listen to some really desperate people. And that's going to help you with your skills in terms of empathy and listening, because those people don't want to be told what to do. They just need somebody to listen to them. And it's the same with the volunteer work I do in the bereavement charity. Of course, I would absolutely love to say, do you know what, you're going to be all right. My dad died when I was 10 as well. My life's worked out. And I don't say a single one of those words. And there's a huge temptation to. But the reality is you've just got to show up, be present, understand, and listen to people. And that's a great skill that you then need to take into planning. So there's loads of responsibility we take for our careers aside from actually practicing the day job. There are, I think Brett speaks about speaking at Toastmasters and practicing our presentation skills and speaking in front of groups of people. There's lots of different things we could do, and we'll probably find it all quite satisfying. If you gave up a day a week, a couple of hours, not a day a week, a couple of hours a week to speak on Childline, even if that exists, I don't know, or Samaritans or whatever it would be, but the human side of volunteer work and getting in touch with those sorts of skills, it's going to hugely elevate your career as a financial planner.
Yeah, well, It's interesting because when I've looked at Brené Brown's work on empathy and what empathy looks like, we tend to think like that we need to have shared an experience in order to empathize. But I completely agree with you. It's not about that. It's about being able to tap into the emotion that somebody else is feeling around a particular experience, or and remaining curious with that and remaining connected with the other person while they're sharing something with you. So yeah, that makes total sense. And so much of that you've mentioned listening a number of times there. So much of it does come down to that, doesn't it? And the ability to be curious. I mean, I would say interested, just being interested in other people, which I think a lot of financial planners, that's why they go into financial planning. Or one of the reasons is because they are deeply interested in people. But I don't think we always act like it. You know, we kind of get a bit caught up in technical knowledge or kind of proving your worth by explaining, you know, how things work, or whatever it might be, rather than listening for longer. So yeah, and well, as you know, like that, I firmly believe that's a skill that can be taught. Like we can get better at listening. So is there anything that you, blatant plug, I suppose, but is there anything that you think younger planners could gain from the work that we did together?
Without a doubt. So, you know, I thought I was somebody that was good at listening, um, and then I kind of realised nowhere near as good as I thought I was. And you know, the 10 components of a thinking environment, it's really quite important to think about what those are and how you can maximise the possibility of having them. So even just thinking about, well, how do I get rid of distractions? So there's an ease in the environment is correctly there for me to focus solely on this person and the attention is all towards what they're saying, and I'm not thinking about what my response is going to be, and I'm showing up with the best ears I can to understand. Because ultimately, if we're going to help people, we've got to understand them. If we're going to understand them, we've got to listen to them. And if we're going to listen to them, we've got to allow their thoughts to go where they want to go, not interrupt them, and not have a judgment or anything like that on what they might say, or even reveal that partway through a conversation. Because people have got to find their feet with their own thoughts. And that was probably the best or the most clear thing I took from that day with you, was thinking about how people start at a surface level and then they get deeper and deeper in their thinking when they're allowed to. But so often every conversation gets interrupted by the person you're speaking to having a thought about what you've just said, takes you back up a level of thinking to where you were originally, and you've not quite got to the depths of where you could have done. And it's down there that the really great stuff happens, where it's probably going to have the most impact, and it's stuff that people perhaps don't even realize until they've been given the freedom. And that's a wonderful feeling to have enabled somebody to have. It's a great feeling to have yourself as well, to just have the freedom to speak to somebody else and actually figure out stuff that you didn't even know about yourself.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think then when you've got a couple in the room as well, they're hearing stuff that they had no idea their partner thought. And that's, I mean, that's super special, isn't it? Cool. Okay, so let's move on to think about the team then. So after we had that day together, you contacted me about working with your team. And I think you said something like, it's obvious that the team is where this needs to be applied all the time. And I guess the angle that I would love to sort of come at this from with you guys, that so every time I work with a team, I try to talk to as many of them individually, one-on-one, beforehand as possible. And when I did that with your team, it was really clear that there was already an openness to their input. The culture was really strong, like a real strong collaborative culture that you built, or that you built as a team. And at the same time, it was clear that you're always looking to grow and improve and learn. So I guess what did you see as the next step, sort of from where you were when you contacted me? What was it that you were hoping to improve on?
I think there's a temptation to think that the work just sits solely within the client meeting, because if we're speaking to advisors, it's about making them a better advisor. But the reality is we can all be a better business to then enable advisors more if we actually operate from a thinking environment, and we have the diversity of thinking. We have people getting an equal or near enough equal turn to be heard to actually express their thoughts. Um, and I mean, I went home after the original day And I had to be really careful with how I said it. But I said to my wife, look, I think you should go on this course as well. I didn't quite say it like that. I didn't say you're a terrible listener, but I did just try to explain how there's a lot that we don't know that we don't know.
Yeah.
And actually, when you can be aware of what your blind spots are, it might make you think differently. And so I just really wanted the team to benefit from what I'd had the benefit of, which not only would help them potentially in the office so that we could run a team meeting in a better way where everyone gets an equal opportunity and we encourage that diversity of thinking, but even in their own personal lives, so that we can show up better for our own children, so we have better relationships with the people that we know. And I'll find myself very often thinking, hang on a second, I wasn't really listening as well in that conversation as I could have done.
Mm.
That doesn't mean I'm just going to sit there and be completely silent in quite the same way that you would do, but I could show up far better. And I'll commonly find myself with an old method of thinking compared to now how I would like to move forward and always try and operate. And why would I not wish that for the team? But also wish it for the business, because there's enough evidence out there to show that you'll be a better run business with diversity of thought. And that doesn't mean you're going to do everything that people come up with, far from. Like, I've still got responsibility and accountability for most things, but it's good that people get to be listened to, they're heard. And I don't think I ever dominated meetings, but it's something that I'm a little bit paranoid about. I don't want people just to go, well, Guy said it, therefore we must. So I actually, people in the team are now empowered to run the meetings because they've seen a way of doing it such that it doesn't have to be me, and they've got the confidence because we only had one session with you, but they've realised and they've seen some skills and behaviours and thought about the thinking environment. So we'll make a meeting in a thinking environment, and we'll talk about that before we started the meeting, and it will be a better quality of meeting. We won't go on tangents as much, and we can be very focused and actually deliver outcomes more quickly and probably with better results.
Well, that's all good to hear. I'm glad it's working. So I guess something I've heard you say a number of times, and you've alluded to it there as well, you are really open to your team's input, which and actually more generally in the world. I think it was at the Future Advisor Conference a couple of weeks ago that I most recently heard you say this, but you said something along the lines of, I honestly believe I can learn something from everyone. And I wonder if that's something that is inherent in you or something that you've learned, or is that, I don't know. I mean, perhaps it's a legacy of your dad, I don't know. But is that something that you have always felt, or is it something that you've developed in yourself deliberately?
I don't think it's something I've always thought. It's not something that my mum would have said after my dad had died, and it's not something that my dad used to say. I actually can't remember much about what my dad thought, or his view of the world. There's very little, it's pre-digital age, so there's very little of a footprint left. And as I work through the paperwork from having my mum having died in the summer, I'm finding things that were from my dad, like premium bonds from 1976 and all sorts of stuff. And honestly, he thought that was a decent investment. But I suppose it just stems from, again, you meet so many people in life, and that's a growing number. It accumulates over time that you just realise there are so many different characters. But there's, you can see somebody that really battles against adversity and what they deliver, and I can definitely learn something from them. I can see somebody who, it's not about intelligence, it's not about emotional intelligence either. You genuinely, I don't know why I think it, but I just do. And the lived experience that you and I have probably represents something like 0.00001% of all the experiences that have ever existed. So from that perspective, if we're just going to be purely logical and talk about probability, therefore I must have not seen so much of the other experiences of life that could be out there. But how could I know what that looks like, what it feels like? So of course I can learn from those people. My wife's a GP, and she went to India, was one of her placements for a summer. She was out there for 10 weeks. And she would just love so many people in this country to go out to India for 10 weeks and then come back and realize how good we have it in this country. The fact that we'd all stop complaining. It's just about different perspectives. and everyone's got a perspective that's worth listening to because we've not walked in their shoes. Um, but I can't say where it comes from or why. I think it's just an accumulated thing that you realise I don't know everything. My thoughts aren't the be all and end all. And you hear enough valuable things from other people. It might only be one snippet of a sentence. You're not going to get the inner workings of everyone's brain. But there are some things that people share and it sticks with you. And you think, actually, would I have arrived at that conclusion myself? Probably not. But I can see the value in that statement and how it applies to other things and the way that I would like to change the way that I think about the world.
And what role does listening play in that for you? Because it seems to link to what you were saying about growing your skills as a financial planner as well, just listening to as many experiences as possible, assimilating all of that, I suppose, and just kind of really putting yourself out there to hear what people have to say and what people are sharing. So yeah, what role does listening play in all of that for you, do you think?
It's repeating myself, but if you don't listen to people, you can't understand them. And crucially, if they don't feel understood, then they're not going to trust you either. And you have to have people trusting you. So the first, probably one of the most base level things you can do to win trust is actually show somebody that you've listened to them and that you've tried to understand them as well and their point of view. So it's just, it's probably a foundational pillar of building trust with somebody. And I like to think that I'm well trusted. I like to think that people know what they're getting when they have me. I suppose one of the other things, actually, I was going to write a LinkedIn post about this at some point, but kind of comes and goes. But I had a postcard on my bedroom door when I was a child. I think my grandma gave it to me when I was about 11 years old. And Guy is Latin for Guido, or Guido is Latin for Guy. And Guido comes from oak, hard wood. There's a kind of literal translation. And it says, Guido, the definition of your name, solid, dependable, resolute in a crisis, and loyal. And so every night I would go to bed, into my bedroom, and I would see what I am. So I suppose one of the other ways of thinking about these things, apart from thinking about why, we can think about who. So who do I actually want to be? And I want to be somebody that does try and understand people, that does give them the time of day, that doesn't dismiss them, that shows them respect, that is curious, because we all know how horrible it feels when you don't feel like you have been understood. And it is something that's really painful and it can cut really quite deep. So it's a really basic thing that we can give one another. It doesn't cost us anything other than time, but actually you'll probably enjoy it and you'll probably learn something from it. So, it's win-win.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, there's an interesting, I can't remember where this came from, but sort of thinking about who's the person you want to become, and really sort of thinking about your development in that way and learning towards that rather than, who do I want to be right now? Who is it that you want to become? I really like that. I think maybe there's a James Clear something about it. Every action is a step towards the person you want to become, something like that. But yeah, and I really like that idea. So I'm really curious about you as a founder as well, Guy, because it's you've said already you've got some fairly clear views on how financial planning should be done. They're fairly high level, but fairly clear views. And I think most people will start their own business because they want to see things done a certain way. And then actually, as the team grows, will often struggle with a loss of control. And I remember in a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned to me that I think there was something that you wanted to bring in to the business maybe it was from working with Brett actually, that you wanted to do, but the team kind of overruled you. And you seemed remarkably okay with that, I have to say, compared to, I think that's quite unusual from what I see in founders of businesses. So I wonder how you see that kind of, does that relinquishing of control come naturally, or is that something you've had to work on?
Getting married was a good education in that.
Yeah.
I say that jokingly, but it's true actually. My wife does like to have a lot of control, so I did have to learn to let go of things. But I mean, that's the reality is we're not in control of a lot of things anyway. So it's not that I don't believe in a higher spirit and that everything happens for a reason. I actually stop short of that way of thinking. But I do realize I'm not in control of a lot of things. And so I have become more at ease over time with just not being the person that has the final say on things. But the reality is that if there's 10 people that all disagree with something that you think, then probability would suggest that they're right and I'm not,
Mm,
because they're more representative as a collective of the collection of clients that we have.
mm,
So there's a good probability that I'm not right. And it doesn't. What we're doing anyway isn't something that couldn't be changed in future. We could test it, and this is something that I'm always open to as well. So you could pilot something and see, well, how did that actually land with the people that you suggested doing what I've thought was a good idea, and if it backfires, fine. If it doesn't, but ultimately, yes, it's my name that's at the bottom of the letters that goes to the clients, and so therefore the accountability, responsibility, it's on me for the content. But it's still the rest of the team that has to deliver it. And if it's upsetting somebody, it's them would have to deal with the fallout of it, probably more often than me. So
mm.
I have to be respectful of what they think is a good thing to do as well, because otherwise, I wouldn't be very happy in their position if I started getting lots of complaints because we were slapping clients around the face with the value that we've added, which is ultimately what I was proposing we put in there in monetary terms, and they're just not comfortable with that. And I do get that, and I do think that we would get some backlash, albeit I can see the benefits of it when alongside the value is what is the cost of our service.
Mm,
There's a far bigger conversation here, isn't there, about the rules and compliance and what the FCA say you must do and all that sort of stuff.
mm, mm.
But we all must appreciate that we get things wrong. We all must appreciate that we can't always be in control. So yeah, I'm not a dictator. Never have been, never will be. And we're not ruled as a committee. I'll still do if I've got real firm conviction in what it is that I'm doing, and I just know that it's a pain we have to go through, then yes, we will do that. But I'll be respectful of other people's thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, and that's really obvious actually when talking to your team. So yeah, it's refreshing. It's refreshing to see, that's for sure. So just sort of as we come to a close, the other theme that I was keen to touch on with you is that of time. So it's a theme that's coming up a lot when I'm talking to leaders, business owners, all sorts of people at the moment. I just don't have enough time to prioritize thinking. I don't have enough time for the stuff that's kind of important but not urgent, the work on the business, not in the business, all of that stuff. And from the outside, you seem to manage that pretty well. Whether you're like a swan, like frantically kicking under the surface of the water, I'm not sure. But yeah, I just wonder how you do that. So you're obviously running the business, speaking at lots of events, giving back in lots of ways, investing in your team, all on top of the client work or underpinning the client work, whichever way you see it. And I just wonder how you do that, how you fit it all in.
Well, I suppose I read Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think I read that when I was 23. It was part of a graduate scheme I was on. And one thing that always stuck me was what he used to term as net time, so no extra time. So how can you do two things at the same time that doesn't impact the quality of the two things that you're doing? I'll give you a really good example right now that most people will see. I'm stood up as we're having this meeting. What does that do for me? Well, I've got better posture. I can stretch as well. So, I might be, if I'm not having a meeting, I might stretch as I'm sending emails and stuff like that. Um, but there is no real magic silver bullet for this. You've got to prioritize what's important to you, and you have to realize simple things like, I know if I've not been to the gym for three or 4 days in a row, my thinking becomes a lot more cloudy and fuzzy, and I don't feel as sharp as I did. Well, the consequence of that is that I don't work as well as I could have done had I kept myself sharp. And again, it's one of the 7 habits of highly effective people called sharpening the saw. So, I've been to the gym already today. I feel better for the fact that I did that. I take my nutrition relatively serious now compared to what I did in the past. So, I'll use apps and I'll look at things. Um, and it's not like it's in my face all the time. And I know that I'm never going to be perfect, but it's not about how do I maintain my standards up there. It's always about how I recover when I let things slip. So recovery is always possible. You just have to you can't beat yourself up for not doing it. You just got to try and make amends the next day without feeling guilty. So I'm not going to say I'm a great time management person because I'm not. I will turn off emails as much as I can and only try and look at them at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon because a lot of emails would have actually taken care of themselves without my intervention. So I'll try not to watch my inbox. But I do take quite a bit of time for myself where I'll go for a walk, I'll go to the gym, I'll drop the kids off at school, I'll pick them up. And so I do have that sort of punctuation of an activity where it's got a full stop at the end of it, and I've got that space to clear the thinking to then do something else. And I think that's probably what a lot of people miss in life. And so they probably just get too caught up in something. And all that, let's also remember the fact that the amount of time you give yourself to do a certain task is probably how long you'll take for it.
Mm.
And the reality is that, you know, I was a complete swine at school. I never used to do any revision for anything. I didn't revise for any exams, even my university degree. I just didn't miss any lectures, but I didn't actually revise for my finals. Um, but I think I probably would only have been about 10% better total, maybe not even that, had I have done that work. But it's because I did all the other things and had that relative balance of exercising and socializing and seeing friends. And I'd deliberately try and punctuate my day so that I can be a bit more reflective. That's the only thing I really do from a time management perspective. I've got my calendar's got loads of different slots, but those things don't necessarily happen because it's easy for me to go, well, I'll just let the CPD slide right now. But then when do I actually do CPD? Well, I'll probably have headphones in when I'm at the gym and I'll be listening to a podcast. I mean, I'm not recording it, which is the hardest part of it, but I am still doing it to gain the thinking around it. So I suppose one of the quick tips is how can you do two things at once just as efficiently as you could have done if you'd done them in isolation? And that's exercise. You know, I used to cycle into work. It was my commute and it was exercise. Again, I've two birds, one stone. So it's not without its challenges though. You go through the middle of your life, you have young children, you have parents that get ill. You know, there's a lot of competing factors. But for me, I know that I just have to eat well, stay hydrated, and do exercise, and keep those kind of pillars of my own well-being in control as best I can, and then everything else kind of flows from that. And I don't feel too stressed by anything else. And I think one of the other things that's always in my mind is it could always be worse. You know, I've had that experience of my dad dying, and I know that this is going to be, you know, if I don't think about this a year from now, what does it really matter? What consequence will it have? So I'll try and use perspective when things might seem like they're overwhelming, and I'll just, you know, it's quite easy to not let it get on top of me too much by doing that.
Mm. Thank you. So, last two questions for you. So, first of all, what's your current growth edge, Guy? What are you working on at the moment?
It's actually trying to build in more leisure time. So I haven't yet cracked the whole of the summer out, and that's in part because my kids aren't old enough. But we had a bit of a dry run with my mum having died in July. I had quite a lot of time out of the business over August and July. So that's the thing that I'm trying to work on. How can I empower the team to make more decisions without me signing off on things? And how can we structure the business such that I get the greater level of time away? Because ultimately, the more I can do that, the more sustainable it is for me to stay on the pitch for as long as possible. But I also think even just day to day, ensuring you have that time for you to just do something that's relaxing, do something that you enjoy, it will make you more productive in the time where you're at the coalface. I've got two AFs that I need to do to get to chartered, but it's been that way since 2016. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit, really. And I feel how do I feel about not being chartered? Well, I think most people are chartered. Well, not most people, but a lot of people are working towards being chartered, and it's just something I've let slip. So that's got to be what I've got to put a lot of time and effort into. And I could make loads of excuses as to I don't have the time, but ultimately we can always find the time if something's important enough. So so that, but also still getting that sufficient leisure time for myself. I don't really believe in working 48 hours a week. I don't even really believe in working 37 hours a week. It's how many productive hours can you do? And again, it's kind of identifying the 80/20. So that's something else I suppose I'm working on. What's the really important stuff that I need to do? And how do I just do that better? Because if that's the 20% that's going to deliver 80% of the results, I can kind of take away from that other 80% of not as productive time to give myself more leisure time to get better at the 20% because I'll be sharper. So it's that continual iteration of thinking, I suppose, that that's dominated my thoughts probably for a good 12 months now.
And as we draw to a close, is there anything else that you wish I'd asked you this afternoon?
No, I think the future's positive. That's how I'd like to end it, really. I think there's a lot that we all need to be proud of as a community of advisors, people that work in this space. And, the future does look really good.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating talking to you and just finding out even more about where you come from and what's behind your passion. And I always close with an appreciation. So I would love to appreciate. So I really appreciate, I think I've had a new insight this afternoon into how intentional you are with your life. Really, really appreciate that. And that the passion that you've got for, I think, everything you do actually, and the care that you put into your work, but into your family, into your own well-being as well, is pretty inspiring. So thank you very much, Guy. Thanks for taking time to have a chat.
Thank you for having me.